Hey guys, thanks for checking out this video. Today I'm going to go through the first three things that you should be putting in your tackle box if you're setting up brand new to fish for striped bass in the back bays, backwaters, back channels, anything from a kayak, bridge fishing, sod bank fishing, wade fishing. If you can only get three things and you're just starting out, these are the three things you want to get. All right, if you're just getting your tackle box set up for some striped bass fishing, you plan on fishing any of the backwaters, the first lure that I would suggest that anybody take a look at is going to be a soft plastic paddle tail. And this one right here is the one that I am typically starting out with, and it is a storm lure. They come in different patterns, different sizes, real small, but this is a storm lure. You don't even have to use storm. You can also go with a regular paddle tail on a jig head. They mimic really well the bait fish that are coming through in the fall. You can see the different colors. This one has a little bit of flash inside of it and the green. This has the flashes, the glitter inside. And this one is just the pure white on a lead head. This one I use, you can see by how it's damaged. I use this off the rocks a lot in the inlets as well. But if you take a look, each one of them has a fairly aggressive paddle tail on it. This one especially. So this is going to give a lot of vibration, a lot of movement in that water when you're pulling it through, and it's going to be much easier for the striped bass to pick up the vibrations and the disturbance in the water on their lateral line. Tossing these out is outstanding. Keep in mind, because of the aggressive paddle tail, they're not incredibly aerodynamic, so when they're flying through the air, they can sometimes create a little extra drag. You're not quite going to get the distance on these that you would from some of the other lures that I'm going to show in a minute. Now, if you need distance and you still would like to use paddle tail, take a look at just this lead head. And you can use a jig head, any type of lead head. And this right here is a Z-Man diesel minnow. You can see it's not quite as aggressive on the paddle tail, but because of the profile on this, you can launch this a mile. So if you want to use the soft plastic and a paddle tail, because it's right for the situation, and you have a lot of high wind and you still need to get the long cast, take a look at something with the lower profile, like this one here. One really important thing to keep in mind when you're using any of these, they are soft. They're soft plastics, and when you're targeting striped bass at any time of year, you run the risk of running into bluefish at the same time. Their teeth will tear these up. You'll get these back after tossing them out, and they'll essentially look like this. No tail on the back of it, and pretty much unusable from that point on. These are not scented, so you have no benefits to tossing them out without that tail on there. So keep that in mind. If you start getting hit by bluefish, but you know there's a striper there and you really want to use these soft plastics, at that point you want to get under them as quick as possible. The bass will, not always, but usually be underneath the bluefish. So if you can get under the bluefish and get into the bass without getting a tail taken off, you can be in pretty good shape and you can start pulling in some nice fish. All right, so let's talk about poppers. Poppers are an outstanding way to catch striped bass in the backwaters, anywhere from the inlets in. It is also true that you use poppers and you can catch them pretty much anywhere. But there are very specific situations where I use them in the backwaters the most, and it's typically at first light, last light, and just into the darkness and just after the sun has come up for the day. So within about an hour or two of the sun up and within an hour or two of the sun down, I am typically moving on from a topwater and looking for something else. But let's talk about the topwaters real quick. I typically use Tsunami. Talking poppers, you don't have to, but they are very good. This one right here has the ports in it. You can see in the bottom here these openings here, and then there's the openings in the front, and that's where the water can come in through the front and then out through the bottom. Leaves a nice bubble trail. You don't have to have that, but it does seem to create a little bit of extra disturbance, a little bit of extra vibration in the water, and I really like using the ported poppers. This one down here you can see is a little bit of a darker color. I use those typically when it's darker. The darker it is, the darker the color that I go with. One thing that I want people to keep in mind is a lot of people will tell you that you can't really use a popper if there's a little chop on the water, and it's best used when the water is smooth. Now, you may be able to say that it's best used when the water is really smooth and flat and like glass, but what you can't say is that they're not effective when there's some chop on the water and there's some surface movement. They absolutely will still work, and they absolutely will still work really well. Uh, I just avoid them when there's incredibly heavy wind and a lot of chop, where you just kind of lose it in all the mess at the top of the water. But they are very effective, even if you have some movement in the water, even if you have some chop on the top. So don't be afraid to try them. When fishing them in the backwaters, they're very good, as I said, first light, last light, but they're very good when you're fishing around areas like bridges and especially sod banks. If you are fishing a sod bank and it's first or last light, you want to use a popper, and you're likely going to get interest out of striped bass, especially in the New Jersey area, maybe even New York, where you keep a large population of resident bass. You want to use it around the sod banks, and you're going to get some interest year round, at least from the resident bass. Just go right down the length of the sod bank and just keep popping it. Walk the dog on the way back in. You'll have a lot of success with the popper. All right, so let's talk about what I think is the single most important lure to have in your tackle box when you're fishing for striped bass. And there's reasons for it that I'll go into that go even beyond striped bass, but that's the bucktail. The traditional bucktail is incredibly effective, and I don't care where you're fishing. You can be on a boat offshore, you can be on the rocks at a jetty, you can be in the sand of the surf, you can be on a boat in the inlet, a kayak in the backwaters, a bridge, fishing at night. It doesn't matter. If you have a bucktail, you have a chance at catching the striped bass. Uh, this is typically the shape that I will use. And you can get them in all different brands. You can see this one's beat up a little bit. I've obviously used this from the rocks a few times. Um, but I do tend to use Hearst, which is a local tackle company. And you can see that here. And the most important thing to do when you're using bucktails is make sure you're matching the water conditions. So I typically try to use the smallest bucktail weight that I can in order to get it where I want it in the water column. So I will use a smaller bucktail if there's no current or very little movement in the water to get it down to the bottom, unless I'm just trying to target the biggest fish possible. Because I have caught on this size in here, the same size striped bass that I have caught with this size and bigger. These are not even the biggest ones. These are about an ounce and a half, I believe. I have bucktails up to 3 to 4 ounces. Actually, 4 ounces is what I typically max out at. So the way you fish it is you're just going to toss it out and you're going to bounce it back in. If you're on a boat, you can do some vertical jigging with these. They work outstanding. But the most important thing is to make sure that you're giving this a try throughout the day. If something's not working, if your paddle tail's not working on its own, if the poppers aren't working, toss the bucktail out there and see what you can get. Now, keep in mind, bucktails are the ultimate multi-species lure. You can use the same bucktails, and I do use the same bucktails for fluke in the summer and in season, for bluefish throughout the year, for striped bass. Go right on down the line. You can pretty much pick up any species that's a predator or an ambush predator by using bucktails. Now, an important part of fishing with the bucktails is what are you going to use on the end. So I don't typically throw out a bare bucktail. Some people do. These don't have anything on them. The only time that I ever really do that is during a bluefish blitz, because I'm typically going to throw some soft plastics on the back, and it's a one and done with a soft plastic and a bluefish. So let me show you real quick just a couple of the plastics that you might want to throw into your bag before you head out for striped bass. All right, so real simple. Again, I could go into a lot of different soft plastics that you can use. What's not shown here, because I don't want to make a mess, is the gulp swim baits, gulp swim mullets. They're outstanding, and they're great for striped bass. Not necessary, but they are great for striped bass. Get a little bit of scent with the action of those, and I think you'll be pretty happy. But if you want to just use the regular plastics, going from the bottom up, again, I pointed this out before. You got the paddle tail. Again, this is a diesel minnow with a fairly aggressive paddle tail on the back. Just putting that on the end of the bucktail will give it the action that you need. You got a sand eel type pattern grubs, and then you got the fluke tails. But notice I tend to use lighter colors, with the exception of something like this. I tend to use the whites, and I found that the white seems to produce in more conditions than any other single color. So you'll hear people saying, "Well, it's all about orange today." Well, it might be, but it was also most likely it was also about white. White presents very naturally when it's out in the water. It's not changing color. So if you have something a light colored bucktail along with a white trailer on a soft plastic, either a paddle tail or a grub or a fluke or something like that, you should be in really good shape. So the way that you're going to put these onto the bucktails are really simple. I'll show you right here. And real quick, let me just give you a tip. When you put it on, you want to pull this bucktail back and away from the hook. And I'll show you why in a minute. And you're just going to thread it on there. And then when you get it around to where you need it, then you just pull it up like that. And the idea is you want it coming straight line off the back, right? Now, by pulling that bucktail aside before I put it on, there's no bucktail that is now inside of the body of the soft plastic, right? So when you take that off, now it's not as easy when it's dry like this, but you're going to want to pull that away as well, because as you pull this off, and you'll notice this if you ever do this at night, when you pull this off, it'll tend to suck some of this into, and it'll get stuck. And you can see it doing that right now. So as you pull this off, okay, you could see that some of this fur was inside of there. It can actually make it hang and slow you down when you're changing them out. But the idea is you want the soft plastic in there and laying straight back behind, and it'll present much more naturally. Just incidentally, this is my favorite when fishing for striped bass. Anything that's a white grub, light colored grub, and with a long tail is really what you want to be using, I believe, because it gives you a lot of action, and the light color helps it to present more naturally. All right, I know that not everyone's going to agree with these three, but I can tell you that from my standpoint, if you are stocking a new tackle box and you need some things to get ready for striped bass season fishing in the backwaters, these are the top three lures that you're going to want to bring with you if you're fishing artificials. Definitely want to be out there with these paddle tails. You definitely want to have top waters. I mean, you bring top water no matter what you're doing. They're just so much fun. But they also do produce, especially around the sod banks. And then never leave home without a bucktail. Bucktail and soft plastics, and you are set for almost any species at any time of the year. So thanks for watching. If you find some value in this, please hit that subscribe button, and talk to you next time.